The massive alien ship appeared in Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning, its dark hull stretching across 15 miles of empty space, like a floating city made of metal and crystal. Commander Zektar stood on the bridge of the Sovereign. Dawn, his forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the blue planet grow larger on the main display. His elongated head tilted slightly, studying the primitive world that would soon become the 48th conquest of the Velkari hegemony. Distance to target planet? Zektar asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had done this many times before. 12 million kilometers in closing, Commander, replied his navigation officer. We should reach optimal transmission. Range within the next hour. Zektar nodded with satisfaction. The pattern was always the same. Approach the target world, demonstrate superior technology, demand surrender, then begin the integration process. Most species surrendered immediately when they saw what they were facing. Those who resisted were quickly overwhelmed by Velkari military superiority and advanced tactics. Sir, we're detecting multiple artificial satellites in orbit around the globe. Planet, reported the sensor operator. Primitive communication arrays and what appear to be defensive installations. Show me their military capabilities, Zektar commanded. The main screen shifted to display a tactical analysis of Earth's defenses. 3 orbital platforms hung in space like metal insects, bristling with crude missile launchers and energy weapons. Several dozen spacecraft patrolled the area between Earth and its moon, their designs clunky and inefficient compared to Velkari engineering. Pathetic, muttered Zektar, second in command, Sub-Commander Velanoth. Their technology appears to be at least 2 centuries behind our current standards. This should be finished before the sun sets on their largest continent. Zektar studied the data more carefully. Something about the human ships bothered him, though he couldn't identify what exactly. Their movement patterns seemed random and chaotic, unlike the precise formations used by every other spacefaring species the Velkari had encountered. Perhaps it was simply poor training or primitive communication systems. Begin standard integration protocol, Zektar ordered. Disable their orbital defenses first, then transmit surrender demands to their planetary government. Meanwhile, Captain? Jake Morrison sat in the command center of Luna Base, Earth's primary military coordination facility, built inside an old mining station on the moon. The 42-year-old former Navy pilot had been staring at the long-range sensor displays for the past 6 hours, watching the alien ship approach with growing dread. Captain, we're getting more detailed scans of the bogey, reported Lieutenant Amy Chun from her sensor station. It's bigger than anything we've ever built. Mass estimates put it at roughly the size of Manhattan. Morrison rubbed his tired eyes. He had hoped the contact protocols developed by the United Earth Defense Force would never be needed. But here they were facing humanity's first encounter with hostile alien intelligence. Any response to our hail attempts? Nothing, sir. They're ignoring all communication frequencies. Keep trying. And get me a direct line to President Hayes. The communication screen flickered to life, showing President Lisa Hayes in the Oval Office, surrounded by advisors and military officials. Her usually composed expression showed the strain of the past few hours. Captain Morrison, what's our situation? She asked without preamble. Not good, Madam President. The alien vessel has ignored all attempts at peaceful contact and continues on a direct course toward Earth. Based on its size and configuration, I'd estimate it's either a massive warship or a colony ship. Either way, it represents a clear threat to planetary security. Admiral Rick Carter leaned into the camera frame. Jake, what's your assessment of our defensive capabilities against this thing? Morrison glanced at the tactical display. Honestly, sir, we're outgunned and outclassed. Our orbital platforms might as well be throwing rocks at a battleship. If they have weapons technology to match their ship design, We won't last 10 minutes in a straight fight." On the alien bridge, Zektar watched as his weapons officer targeted the human orbital platforms. "Fire precision beams. Disable their weapons, but leave the structures intact. We'll need them for our own defense grid later." 3 beams of coherent energy lanced out from the Sovereign Dawn, each one striking a different platform with surgical accuracy. The human weapons systems simply vanished, vaporized at the molecular level, while the platforms themselves remained structurally sound, but completely defenseless. "Target neutralized, Commander," reported the weapons officer. "Human defensive capabilities have been eliminated." Morrison watched in horror as his orbital defenses died without firing a single shot. Dear God, they took out all 3 platforms simultaneously. The precision is incredible. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the alien vessel," Chun announced. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies in what appears to be translated English. Put it through." The main screen shifted to show Commander Zektar standing in what was obviously the bridge of an advanced starship. When he spoke, his words were translated by sophisticated computer systems that had analyzed human communications for months. "People of Earth, I am Commander Zektar of the Velkari Hegemony. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire. You have demonstrated that resistance is futile by witnessing the destruction of your orbital defenses. You have 72 of your planetary rotations to prepare for peaceful surrender. Any attempt at military resistance will result in the complete subjugation of your species. This is your only warning." The transmission ended, leaving Morrison staring at a blank screen. Around him, the command center had fallen silent, except for the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional beep from monitoring systems. "Sir, we're getting reports from all major population centers," Chon said quietly. The alien transmission was broadcast globally. "There's panic in the streets of every major city." Morrison stood slowly, his mind racing through options and finding few that offered any hope. "Get me General Brooks at Colorado Springs and Admiral Carter at Norfolk. We need to convene an emergency strategy session with all senior military leadership." As the hours passed, emergency meetings took place in government buildings and military installations around the world. President Hayes addressed the nation, urging calm while promising that Earth's military forces would explore every possible option. General Amy Brooks coordinated with international defense forces, sharing intelligence and attempting to develop some kind of response plan. But even as humanity's leaders struggled to find a solution, Captain Morrison found himself studying the alien ship's movement patterns with growing interest. The vessel maintained perfect formation protocols, followed predictable patrol routes, and demonstrated the kind of rigid tactical discipline that suggested extensive experience fighting organized military forces. "Chun, pull up our historical analysis of the alien ship's behavior," Morrison said. "Sir, they're fighting like they expect us to follow rules," Morrison said slowly. "Look at their patrol patterns, their formation flying, even the way they disabled our platforms instead of destroying them completely. They're playing by some kind of military doctrine." Morrison stared at the tactical display, an idea beginning to form in his mind. The aliens clearly had superior technology and firepower, but they also seemed to have very specific expectations about how warfare should be conducted. What would happen if humanity refused to play by those rules? Commander Zektar stood in the intelligence center of the Sovereign Dawn, studying holographic displays that showed detailed information about human military history. His war council had spent the past day analyzing intercepted human communications, databases, and historical records to understand what kind of resistance they might face during the integration process. "Show me their most recent military conflicts," Zektar commanded. The hologram shifted to display footage from various human wars over the past century. Velkari analysts had compiled videos of tank battles, aerial combat, naval engagements, and infantry operations. Zektar watched with growing confidence as he observed the primitive nature of human warfare. Their weapons technology is crude, but functional, reported Intelligence Officer Kezelin. They use chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, and basic energy weapons. Their military organization follows predictable hierarchical structures with clear command chains and defined roles for different units. Sub-Commander Velinoth pointed at footage of a tank battle. Look at their formation tactics. They advance in organized groups, maintain communication lines, and retreat when faced with superior firepower. Very standard military doctrine, just poorly executed due to their technological limitations. Zektar nodded approvingly. Every species the Velkari had conquered followed similar patterns. Military forces engaged in open combat, governments negotiated through official channels, and civilian populations remained separate from combat operations. Even the most warlike species eventually recognized when they were outmatched and accepted defeat gracefully. What about their leadership structure? Zektar asked. Typical hierarchical government with civilian authority over military forces, Kezelin replied. Once we eliminate their senior military commanders and capture their political leaders, resistance should collapse rapidly. Their soldiers appear to be well-trained, but depended on orders from above. Zektar studied more footage showing human soldiers in various conflicts. They moved in organized formations, followed standard tactical procedures, and used conventional weapons in predictable ways. The chaos and confusion he observed seemed to result from poor coordination and primitive communication systems rather than any fundamental difference in military thinking. Prepare detailed battle plans for planetary invasion, Zektar ordered. Standard integration protocol should be sufficient. We'll establish landing zones in major population centers, neutralize their military installations, and capture their government facilities. Resistance should end within one planetary rotation. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Kate Sullivan hurried through the corridors of the Pentagon, carrying a thick folder filled with historical documents and tactical analyses. The 45-year-old military historian had been called to brief the emergency Defense Council about humanity's chances against an advanced alien invasion force. President Hayes sat at the head of a long conference table surrounded by the highest ranking military officers in the United States and several allied nations. Admiral Carter looked exhausted after 36 hours of non-stop planning sessions. General Brooks studied satellite images of the alien ship with obvious frustration. Dr. Sullivan, we need to understand what we're dealing with, President Hayes said as Kate entered the room. These aliens clearly have superior technology, but military superiority isn't just about weapons and equipment. What can you tell us about their probable tactical thinking? Kate opened her folder and spread several documents across the table. Based on their behavior so far, I believe we're dealing with a highly organized military force that follows very specific rules of engagement. They disabled our orbital platforms instead of destroying them. They gave us a formal surrender deadline, and they're maintaining predictable patrol patterns around our planet. What does that tell us? Asked Admiral Carter. It tells us they've never fought anyone like us, Kate replied. Every military engagement in their experience has probably involved organized armies fighting according to established rules of warfare. They expect clear military targets, defined battlefields, and recognizable command structures. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Rodriguez leaned forward from his position near the wall. The Special Operations Officer had been studying the alien ships. Movements for hours, looking for any tactical weakness. Dr. Sullivan, are you suggesting these aliens don't understand unconventional warfare? Kate nodded emphatically. I don't think they have any concept of guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, or civilian resistance movements. Look at their historical pattern. They've conquered 47 worlds using the same basic approach. That suggests they've never encountered serious irregular resistance. General Brooks looked up from the satellite images. Explain what you mean by irregular resistance. Think about every major conflict in human history where a technologically superior force was defeated by a supposedly inferior enemy, Kate said. The American Revolution, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In each case, the weaker force won by refusing to fight according to the stronger enemy's expectations. Rodriguez stood and walked to the tactical display showing Earth's major cities. So you're suggesting we don't try to match their technology or fight them in open battle? I'm suggesting we do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds, Kate replied. We adapt, we improvise, and we make the enemy fight our kind of war instead of theirs. President Hayes studied the faces around the table. What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Sullivan? Kate took a deep breath before answering. We let them think they've won. We stage a false surrender, allow them to establish occupation forces in major cities, then show them what human resistance really looks like. We turn every street into a battlefield, every building into a fortress, and every citizen into a potential combatant. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Carter was the first to speak. That would mean abandoning our conventional military forces and asking civilians to fight an enemy with superior weapons and technology. Admiral, our conventional forces are already obsolete against this enemy, Rodriguez said. They proved that when they disabled our orbital platforms without breaking a sweat. Dr. Sullivan is right. We can't win by playing their game. General Brooks shook her head. You're talking about turning our entire population into insurgents. The casualties would be enormous. The casualties will be enormous anyway if we lose, Kate replied. But history shows that occupying forces have tremendous difficulty dealing with populations that refuse to accept defeat. The aliens expect military resistance from organized units. They're not prepared for resistance from everyone. President Hayes stared at the tactical display for several long minutes. Dr. Sullivan, you're asking me to authorize what amounts to total war using our own population as soldiers. Madam President, total war is what humans do best, Kate said quietly. Every other species these aliens have conquered probably fought like civilized beings with rules and limitations. We need to show them that humans don't have those limitations when our survival is at stake. Rodriguez walked back to the conference table. I can coordinate with resistance cells in major cities. We have veterans, police officers, and citizens, with military training scattered throughout the population. If we can organize them into small, independent units with no central command structure, the aliens won't be able to cut off the head and kill the resistance. What about weapons and supplies? Asked General Brooks. We improvise, Rodriguez replied. Humans have been making weapons out of household materials for thousands of years. We use their own equipment against them when we can capture it. We turn our infrastructure into weapons. Power grids, transportation systems, communication networks. Admiral Carter looked skeptical. You're assuming these aliens won't simply destroy major population centers if they face serious resistance. Kate shook her head. They need our population intact for integration into their empire. They're conquerors, not exterminators. That's another limitation we can exploit. President Hayes finally spoke. This is the most dangerous decision any leader has ever had to make. We're talking about betting human civilization on the theory that aliens who have conquered nearly 50 worlds have never learned to deal with guerrilla warfare. Madam President, Kate said, we're betting human civilization that we can do something no other species has managed to do. We're betting that being human is enough. The first Valkyrie landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like silver teardrops, their hulls gleaming in the morning sunlight as they approached the designated landing zones in major cities around the world. Commander Zektar watched from the bridge of the Sovereign Dawn as his occupation forces deployed, according to the carefully planned integration protocol that had worked successfully on 47 previous worlds. "Landing sequence proceeding normally," reported his operations officer. "No resistance detected at any of the primary sites." Zektar nodded with satisfaction. The human surrender had come exactly 71 hours and 15 minutes after his ultimatum, well within the expected time frame. President Hayes had delivered a formal statement of unconditional surrender, ordering all military forces to stand down and cooperate with Valkyrie occupation authorities. The primitive species had recognized the futility of resistance, just as every other civilization had done when faced with superior Valkyrie technology. "Begin establishing administrative centers in each major population hub," Zektar commanded. "Deploy security patrols and start processing the local population for integration assignments." In the city of Chicago, Valkyrie troops marched through empty streets toward the designated government buildings that would serve as their command centers. The aliens moved in perfect formation, their energy weapons held at ready positions, their communication equipment maintaining constant contact with orbiting support vessels. Everything proceeded exactly according to standard occupation procedures. Major Kolveth led the primary occupation force through downtown Chicago, his sensors scanning for any signs of military resistance. The humans had withdrawn their forces, as ordered, leaving behind empty police stations, abandoned military installations, and deserted government offices. The integration was proceeding more smoothly than usual. "Sir, we're approaching the target building," reported Sergeant Dexron. "No defensive positions detected. No military personnel in the area." Kolveth studied the massive structure that would serve as their regional headquarters. The humans had even been considerate enough to clear the area of civilians, making the occupation process much more efficient than he had expected. "Begin securing the perimeter and establish communication relays." Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, Chief Warrant Officer Danny Kim crouched in the basement of an abandoned restaurant, watching the alien troops through a small periscope device that extended up through the rubble. The 38-year-old former Army engineer had spent the past 3 days preparing the downtown area for the occupation, and everything was going exactly according to plan. "They're setting up just like we predicted," Danny whispered into his radio. "Full standard deployment pattern. No flanking guards, no irregular patrols. They're following their textbook perfectly." The voice of former Police Sergeant Maria Lopez crackled through his earpiece. "Confirmed. We're seeing the same pattern in all sectors. They're treating this like a formal military operation." Danny smiled grimly as he watched the aliens establish their communication equipment in predictable locations. Dr. Sullivan had been absolutely right about these invaders. They were fighting the last war instead of the current one, and they had no idea what they were walking into. "All units, this is Kim," he spoke into his radio. "Execute Phase 1 in 30 minutes. Remember, hit fast, hit hard, and disappear. Make them think they're dealing with equipment failures and accidents." 3 hours later, Major Kolveth stood in the ruins of what had been his communication center, staring at the twisted metal and shattered electronics that littered the floor. His troops had heard the explosion, but found no trace of attackers, no evidence of weapons fire, and no indication of how the destruction had occurred. "Report," Kolveth demanded as his communications officer approached. "Sir, the explosion appears to have originated from within our own equipment," the officer replied, clearly confused. "Initial analysis suggests a power overload in the primary relay system, but our engineers cannot determine the cause." Kolveth walked through the debris, his 4 eyes scanning for clues. Velkari equipment was built to the highest standards and tested extensively before deployment. Spontaneous failures were virtually unknown, especially in newly installed systems. Begin immediate repairs and implement backup communication protocols. Similar incidents occurred throughout the day in occupation zones around the world. In New York, a Velkari supply convoy disappeared completely while traveling between 2 secured positions, leaving only scorch marks on the roadway. In London, patrol units reported being attacked by invisible enemies who struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. In Tokyo, an entire administrative center lost power when the local electrical grid suffered a mysterious cascade failure. Commander Zektar reviewed the incident reports with growing frustration. "Show me the attack patterns," he commanded. Tactical displays showed red markers indicating locations where Velkari forces had suffered equipment failures, supply losses, or unexplained attacks. The markers were scattered randomly across multiple continents with no apparent coordination or central planning. Analysis suggests these are isolated incidents caused by equipment malfunctions and random civilian unrest. Reported intelligence. Officer Kezelan. There's no evidence of organized military resistance. Sub-Commander Valinov studied the display more carefully. Sir, the frequency of these incidents is unusually high for a recently surrendered population. Perhaps we should implement stricter security protocols. Zektar considered the suggestion, but dismissed it. Every conquered species produced some civilian unrest during the initial occupation period. Random acts of sabotage and equipment failures were normal parts of the integration process that typically ended once the local population accepted their new circumstances. Increase patrol frequency and implement standard counter-unrest procedures, Zektar ordered. Post public notices explaining the consequences of interfering with Velkari operations. Begin identification and registration of all adult civilians. In Seattle, Danny Kim read the alien announcement posted on electronic billboards throughout the city. The Velkari were threatening collective punishment for any interference with their occupation forces, a tactic that had probably worked well on civilized species who valued the safety of their communities above individual resistance. "Maria, are you seeing this?" Danny spoke into his concealed radio. "Copy that. They're really following the textbook, aren't they?" Danny studied the formal language of the announcement, the official tone of authority, and the assumption that threatened punishment would deter further resistance. These aliens clearly had no understanding of how humans responded to threats against their families and communities. "All units, this is Kim," he transmitted to resistance cells throughout the city. "They just made their biggest mistake. Phase 2 is now authorized. Show them what happens when you threaten human civilians." That night, Maria Lopez led a team of 12 volunteers through the storm drainage system beneath downtown Seattle. Her team consisted of former military personnel, retired police officers, and ordinary citizens who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. They carried improvised weapons built from hardware store materials and alien equipment salvaged from previous operations. "Target is the main processing center where they're registering civilians," Maria whispered as they approached their destination. "Intel says they have about 40 guards and minimal defensive positions. They're not expecting an underground approach." The team emerged from a maintenance tunnel directly beneath the alien facility. Maria watched through night vision equipment as Velkari guards walked their predictable patrol routes, maintaining perfect formation and timing. The aliens had established security protocols designed to defeat conventional military attacks. But they had no defense against enemies who appeared from unexpected directions using unconventional tactics. "Remember, we're not trying to hold territory," Maria reminded her team. "Hit them hard, take their equipment, and get out before reinforcements arrive. Make them afraid to leave their secure areas. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes. Humans struck from multiple directions simultaneously, using explosive devices, captured alien weapons, and crude but effective improvised arms. By the time Valkyrie reinforcements arrived, the attackers had vanished back into the underground tunnel system, leaving behind destroyed equipment and 12 dead alien soldiers. Major Kolveth arrived at the scene within minutes of the attack, but found only empty corridors and the aftermath of violence, unlike anything in Valkyrie military experience. The attack had shown no regard for military protocol, no attempt to capture territory, and no concern for the safety of nearby civilian populations. "Sir, this was not random unrest," reported his security chief. "This was a coordinated military operation conducted by trained personnel." Kolveth studied the scene with growing unease. But the humans surrendered. Their government ordered all military forces to stand down. Perhaps not all of their military forces received the order. The situation on Earth had deteriorated beyond anything Commander Zektar had experienced in his 40 years of military service. 3 weeks into what should have been a routine occupation, Valkyrie forces were suffering daily casualties from an enemy they could not identify, locate, or understand. The humans had surrendered according to all proper protocols, yet the resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. "Show me the latest casualty reports," Zektar commanded as he stood before the tactical display in his command center. Intelligence Officer Kezalan activated the holographic map showing red markers across every occupied territory on Earth. "We have lost 317 personnel in the past 7 days, sir. Equipment losses include 42 transport vehicles, 6 communication arrays, and an entire supply depot in what the humans call Los Angeles." Zektar studied the pattern of attacks with growing frustration. The markers showed no logical organization, no central command structure, and no predictable tactical objectives. Attacks occurred in broad daylight and complete darkness, in heavily secured areas and supposedly safe zones, against military targets and civilian infrastructure with equal frequency. "What about prisoner interrogations?" Zektar asked. "Have we learned anything about their command structure?" Kezalan's expression showed his confusion. "Sir, we have captured 43 human combatants, but their testimonies make no sense according to standard military organization. They claim to belong to different groups with names like resistance cells, neighborhood watches, and citizen militias. Most insist they receive no orders from higher authorities and plan their own operations independently." Sub-Commander Velenoth approached the display with his own report. "Sir, I recommend we implement maximum security protocols and begin systematic elimination of the human population in areas where attacks have occurred. Standard pacification techniques are clearly insufficient for this species." Zektar considered the suggestion, but rejected it immediately. "Negative. We need the human population intact for integration into our workforce. Dead civilians provide no economic value to the Empire." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison sat in a hidden command bunker built inside an abandoned subway station 30 feet beneath Washington, D.C. The facility had been constructed during the 3-day surrender period, designed to coordinate resistance operations without maintaining the centralized command structure that aliens would expect to find. Status report from all sectors. Morrison spoke into his communication system. Danny Kim's voice crackled through the encrypted channel from Seattle. Northwest Sector reporting successful operations against 3 supply convoys this week. We've captured enough alien equipment to arm 2 new cells and disrupted their logistics network throughout the region. Maria Lopez checked in from her new position coordinating urban warfare in Denver. Mountain region cells have established control over most rural areas. The aliens can't move between cities without facing constant ambush attacks. Similar reports came from resistance coordinators around the world. Sharon Davis reported from Houston that her aviation unit had successfully captured 2 alien aircraft and learned to fly them through trial and error. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez confirmed from Miami that his teams had infiltrated several occupation facilities and were feeding intelligence to local resistance groups. "Jake, we need to talk about escalation," Rodriguez said during the secure conference call. "The aliens are getting frustrated. Our intelligence suggests they're considering more aggressive tactics against civilian populations." Morrison studied the tactical situation on his display screens. The resistance was succeeding beyond their wildest expectations, but success brought new dangers. Desperate enemies made unpredictable decisions, and humans had learned that lesson from their own history. "Ben, what are you thinking?" "I think it's time to show them what happens when they threaten our families," Rodriguez replied. "We've been hitting their patrols and supply lines, but we haven't touched their primary assets. Maybe it's time to go after their command ship." Morrison considered the suggestion carefully. An attack on the Sovereign Dawn would represent a massive escalation. That could trigger retaliation against Earth's major cities. But the intelligence reports suggested the aliens were already considering such retaliation, and a successful strike against their flagship might convince them that Earth was too dangerous to occupy. "Sharon, what's the status of those captured?" "Alien fighters? We have 3 operational craft and 12 volunteers who've learned to fly them," Sharon replied. "The controls are weird, but not impossible once you get used to the 4-dimensional interface. These things are fast and heavily armed. Could you get close enough to their command ship to do serious damage?" "Maybe. Their fighter pilots follow very predictable patrol patterns and don't seem to expect attacks from their own aircraft, but it would be a one-way mission. Those volunteers understand they're not coming back." Morrison closed his eyes and thought about the 12 people who were willing to sacrifice their lives for a chance to strike back at the invaders. Every day, ordinary humans made extraordinary choices that would have been impossible to explain to the aliens, who thought they understood warfare. "Do it," Morrison said finally, "but wait for my signal. I want to coordinate the attack with ground operations to maximize the psychological impact." Aboard the Sovereign Dawn, Zektar was reaching the same conclusion about escalation from the opposite direction. The human resistance had proven impossible to suppress using conventional occupation tactics, and the Velkari High Command was demanding results. "Sir, we're receiving orders from the Home Fleet," reported his communications. "Officer, High Command is authorizing the use of planetary bombardment weapons against major population centers if the resistance cannot be eliminated within the next 10 days. Zektar read the encoded message with growing dread. Planetary bombardment would destroy the very population the Empire needed for economic integration, but continued casualties among Velkari forces was becoming politically unacceptable on the home worlds. Sub-Commander Velinoth, prepare targeting solutions for the largest human cities." Zektar ordered reluctantly. "We'll give them one final warning before implementing orbital bombardment." The message was transmitted to every communication device on Earth within hours. Commander Zektar's image appeared on television screens, computer monitors, and mobile phones around the world as he delivered an ultimatum that would have terrified any civilized species. "Humans of Earth, your continued resistance to lawful Velkari authority has forced us to implement final pacification protocols. You have 48 hours to identify and surrender all resistance personnel, or we will begin systematic destruction of your major population centers. This is your final warning." In the hidden bunker beneath Washington, Morrison watched the alien commander deliver his threat with cold fury. Around him, resistance coordinators listened in grim silence as Zektar essentially declared war on human civilization. "Jake, they just made the biggest mistake in their military history," Rodriguez said quietly. They threatened our families. Morrison nodded slowly. Signal all units. Execute maximum response protocols. Show them what total war really means. Within hours, resistance cells that had been conducting careful, limited operations received authorization for unrestricted warfare. The gloves came off as humans demonstrated why their species had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars against impossible odds. In Chicago, Danny Kim led 200 volunteers in a coordinated assault against the main Velkari command center. Instead of hit-and-run tactics, they used suicide bombers, chemical weapons improvised from household materials, and human wave attacks that overwhelmed alien defensive positions through sheer determination and disregard for casualties. In London, resistance fighters flooded the underground tunnels with flammable gas and turned the entire subway system into a massive bomb that destroyed 3 city blocks and everything in them, including 1,000 human civilians and 400 alien troops. Similar attacks occurred simultaneously around the world as humans abandoned any pretense of civilized warfare and embraced the total war mentality that had carried their species through every existential crisis in their history. Sharon Davis led her 12 volunteer pilots in their captured alien fighters toward the Sovereign Dawn, broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies as they approached the massive command ship. This is humanity's answer to your ultimatum. When you threaten our families, we become something your civilized minds cannot comprehend. We become the nightmare that hunts the hunters. The alien fighters opened fire on their own mothership as Sharon's voice echoed through space, carrying a message that would change the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be human. The Sovereign Dawn shuddered violently as Sharon Davis and her 11 volunteer pilots slammed their captured fighters into the massive command ship at maximum velocity. The alien vessel's shields had been designed to deflect external attacks, not to stop their own fighters from ramming the hull at near light speed. Explosions rippled across the ship's surface as human pilots gave their lives to prove that Earth would never surrender. Commander Ziktar was thrown from his command chair as the bridge system sparked and failed around him. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as damage reports flooded the communication channels. The humans had done something no enemy in Velkari history had ever attempted. They had sacrificed their own people to damage a target that should have been unreachable. Damage report, Ziktar shouted over the chaos. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, his engineering officer reported. Primary power is failing. We've lost main engines and orbital positioning systems. Sub-Commander Velenoth pulled himself to his feet, his uniform torn and one arm hanging uselessly at his side. Sir, the humans used suicide attacks against our own vessel. How could they sacrifice trained pilots for such a minor tactical advantage? Ziktar stared at the tactical display showing the Sovereign Dawn slowly falling toward Earth's atmosphere. The human attack had crippled his flagship, but more importantly, it had demonstrated something that challenged everything the Velkari thought they knew about warfare. Civilized species protected their trained personnel above all else. They negotiated when faced with superior force. They surrendered when the cost of resistance became too high. Sir, we're receiving multiple transmission from the surface, reported the communications officer. Human resistance forces are broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through, Ziktar ordered. Captain Jake Morrison's voice filled the damaged bridge as he spoke from his hidden bunker beneath Washington. Commander Ziktar, this is Captain Morrison of the Human Resistance. Your ship is falling toward our planet, and your occupation forces are surrounded in every major city. You have one chance to avoid complete destruction. Withdraw all Velkari forces from Earth immediately, or we will show you what happens when humans fight for their survival. Ziktar activated his own communication system. Captain Morrison, you cannot possibly believe that your primitive species can defeat the full military might of the Velkari Empire. Even if you destroy my ship and kill my occupation forces, the home fleet will send reinforcements that will turn your entire planet into radioactive dust. Morrison's laugh echoed through the bridge speakers. Commander, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. We're not fighting to win a battle or capture territory. We're fighting to prove that Earth is too dangerous for anyone to occupy. Even if you destroy our planet, every species in the galaxy will know that humans died fighting. They'll know that we made you pay for every mile, every building, every life. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez led the final assault against the Velkari Command Center in Miami. His force consisted of 300 humans armed with captured alien weapons, improvised explosives, and the absolute determination of people who had nothing left to lose. They moved through the streets like a human tide, absorbing casualties that would have broken any other military force while continuing their advance. Sir, the humans are attacking our perimeter defenses, reported Major Kolveth from his position inside the fortified command center. They're taking massive casualties, but refusing to retreat. Some of them are using suicide attacks to breach our defensive lines. The Velkari garrison commander studied his tactical displays with growing horror. Human attackers were throwing themselves against energy barriers that vaporized them instantly, but each death created a gap that allowed more humans to advance. They were using their own bodies as weapons, treating death as just another tactical tool. Fall back to secondary positions, the commander ordered. Implement maximum firepower protocols. Rodriguez watched through his binoculars as alien weapons cut down dozens of his volunteers, but the advance never stopped. Men and women who had been accountants, teachers, and shop owners 3 months ago now charged directly into alien fire with the fury of cornered animals. They had learned that surrender meant slavery, negotiation meant deception, and mercy was a luxury that humans could not afford. All units, final assault, Rodriguez commanded. Remember what they threatened to do to our families. Make them pay for every breath they take on our planet. Aboard the falling Sovereign Dawn, Zektar received reports from occupation forces around the world. Every Velkari installation was under simultaneous attack by humans who fought with tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They used children as messengers and suicide bombers. They turned hospitals into weapons factories. They poisoned water supplies that their own people would have to drink. They fought like a species that had never learned the concept of acceptable losses. Sir, Major Kolveth reports that his position has been overrun, the communications officer announced. The humans are inside the Miami command center. Zektar closed his 4 eyes and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The Velkari had conquered civilizations with technology far more advanced than humanity's. They had defeated species with superior numbers, better weapons, and stronger military traditions. But they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare as a matter of species survival rather than political objectives. Commander, we're being hailed by multiple alien vessels, his sensor operator reported. Long-range scanners show ships from at least 6 different species approaching our position. The main screen activated to show a collection of alien vessels from various civilizations that the Velkari had conquered over the past century. The lead ship transmitted a message that made Zektar's blood run cold. Commander Zektar, this is Admiral Nextara of the Liberated Worlds Coalition. We have been monitoring your attempted conquest of the human homeworld. Your defeat by a primitive species has inspired rebellion throughout the Empire. We are here to offer humanity membership in our alliance against Velkari tyranny. Zektar realized that the disaster on Earth had spread far beyond one failed conquest. The sight of humans defeating superior Velkari forces had encouraged resistance movements throughout the Empire. Worlds that had accepted Velkari rule for decades were suddenly remembering what freedom meant. Captain Morrison's voice filled the bridge one final time. "Commander Zektar, you came here thinking you understood combat. You thought war was about technology, organization, and superior firepower. You never realized that for some species, warfare isn't about winning battles. It's about surviving. Extinction. Humans don't fight wars. We fight for the right to exist." The Sovereign Dawn's hull began glowing as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Zektar activated the emergency evacuation systems, but he knew that his military career was over. The Velkari Empire had suffered its first major defeat, and news of that defeat would spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. All remaining forces, execute immediate withdrawal, Zektar ordered. Abandon all surface positions and retreat to the outer system. As Velkari ships fled Earth's gravity well, they transmitted warnings to the galactic community about the dangerous species they had encountered. The messages described humans as savage, unpredictable, and willing to sacrifice everything for their independence. They warned that Earth should be declared a forbidden zone, marked as too dangerous for any civilized contact. 6 months later, President Hayes stood before the United Nations delivering a speech that would be remembered for centuries. Behind her, the rebuilt orbital platforms bristled with weapons technology reverse-engineered from captured Velkari equipment. Human ships patrolled the solar system, crewed by volunteers who had learned alien technology through trial and error. Fellow humans, we have proven something that no other species in the galaxy believed possible. We have shown that advanced technology and superior numbers mean nothing when faced with the determination of free people fighting for their homes. The galaxy thought they understood combat until they started a fight with us. Hayes gestured toward the star-filled sky visible through the assembly hall's transparent dome. But our victory comes with responsibility. Other worlds are fighting for their freedom, inspired by our example. The Velkari Empire is crumbling as species after species refuse to accept slavery. It's time for humanity to take its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as defenders of freedom. The final scene showed human ships joining the liberated World's Coalition fleet, their hulls bearing the scars of desperate battles, but their crews ready for whatever challenges awaited them among the stars. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about the species from Earth. They were not advanced. They were not civilized, but they were absolutely unstoppable when fighting for their survival. In the depths of space, former Velkari territories declared independence one by one, each rebellion inspired by the example of humans who had refused to surrender. The age of Velkari dominance was ending, replaced by something the galaxy had never seen before, a coalition of free worlds united by the principle that some things were worth dying for.